final speaker, however, this evening, before we go to questions, is Tony Greenstein. Whether you all know Tony as an activist for Palestine and an author of the book Zionism During the Holocaust, also a member of Jewish Network for Palestine. So, Tony, the closing speech is over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Esther. It has indeed been a really wonderful webinar in so many ways, and we've heard from such excellent speakers that I feel cast in the shadows. I was particularly interested by what Frank said about Ireland and the support for Palestine in Ireland, because I did a mini tour last year to Cork, and I was quite overwhelmed really by the support of Irish people for the Palestinians. And that is not surprising because, of course, the history of the establishment of the Israeli state and the mandate in Palestine closely followed the partition of Ireland. Both occurred in the early 1920s, and both were under Winston Churchill, who was then the colonial secretary. And it was Sir Ronald Stores, who was the first British military governor of Jerusalem, who I think summed it up when he said about Zionism that it was one that blessed him that gave as well as him that took, by forming for Israel a little loyal Jewish Ulster in the sea of hostile pan-Arabism. And really, that summed up everything about the British attitude, because, I mean, people often associate, when they hear the word Zionism, they often associate it with Jews. And there are many in the Palestine solidarity movement even who are unable to distinguish between Jews and Zionism. But the history of Zionism is that the British and the imperialists adopted Zionism well before Jewish people did. It was Palmerston and Lord Shaftesbury in 1840 and 1842 who urged the Jewish Board of Deputies, which today is really just a Zionist lobby organisation, to agree to the Jewish return to Palestine. And the Board of Deputies and many other Jewish organisations rejected that because their main aim was to achieve emancipation, which occurred in Britain in 1858. The last thing they wanted was to be told that they were really an alien people who were destined to return to what was their original homeland in Palestine. Christian Zionism preceded Jewish Zionism by 4 centuries, and it was no accident that in 1917, when the Balfour Declaration was agreed by the Lloyd George War Cabinet, that the only member of that cabinet to vote against the Balfour Declaration was its only Jewish member, Sir Edwin Montagu. But of course, all these things disappear down a memory hole, and they're not remembered. They disappear from history altogether. And indeed, up to the Second World War, the majority of Jews in the diaspora, not least in Poland, which had 3.3 million Jews, was overwhelmingly anti-Zionist. And I don't think people should forget that, because today we see, of course, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner rerouting Palestine solidarity marches in order to protect Jewish worshippers at synagogues. And if you believe that, you believe anything. Jews today are used as a moral alibi for Zionism and for the genocide in Palestine, but they are not the cause. The cause, of course, is the imperialist interests themselves. And we've heard from Huda and others about the attacks on our democratic rights. I mean, all I really have to say about that is that democratic rights such as freedom of speech, freedom of association, the right to demonstrate, were not given to us on a plate by our legislators or the judges. They were fought for. There is nothing new in today's attack on free speech. The Chartists, trade unions, the Suffragettes, they all experience the same attacks. And people like William Cobbett, Richard Carlyle, Thomas Paine even, the theoretician of the American and French revolutions, they were all attacked and they all suffered imprisonment at one time or another. So when we're told that it's the rule of law, I think we can treat that with a certain contempt and disdain. Our ruling class has always had a disregard for democratic rights if it could get away with it. And the fact that we have freedom of speech, albeit now limited freedom of speech, is because of those past struggles. Britain is wedded, of course, to the United States. Ever since Suez, its foreign policy has in essence been that of the United States. And given that the United States has its client state Israel, its settler attack dog, if you like, in the Middle East, it's no accident that Britain keeps as close as it can to everything that the United States does foreign policy wise. So we saw that, for example, only a couple of days ago. Russia attacked Ukraine, 21 people were killed, others were injured. And immediately David Lammy summoned the Russian ambassador to see him. It's a way of expressing your disapproval diplomatically. And yet thousands have died, children, women, starved to death in Gaza. And there's not a hint that David Lammy is going to summon the Israeli ambassador, Tzipi Hotovely, a complete religious nut, incidentally, to see him. Despite the protestations of Lammy and even Starmer that they disapprove of Israel, when it comes down to it, they really want to do nothing to offend their attack dog apart from pious words, token sanctions on Smotrich and Ben Gvir and a few key settlers in the West Bank. But nothing that Israel does could possibly affect what is in essence a special relationship. And we've seen that with the international law, the complete shredding of international law, such that the United States is now sanctioning the court, the International Criminal Court itself, and the chief prosecutor. And there's apparently a Mossad team alive and well somewhere in the Netherlands, tracking down Karim Khan, the prosecutor. What we see is Trump and his administration behaving like mafia bosses, seeking to take out the courts and the judges when the law goes against them. So international law has been rendered almost totally useless because it has no enforcement mechanism. I mean, this is not surprising, of course. The same happened with Nicaragua when America mined its ports back in the 1980s. But it's just a reminder, really, of the kind of system we live in, that beneath the democratic facade lies, in essence, a capitalist dictatorship. And we should not forget that. I should mention, I guess, my own arrest. I was arrested twice. The first time was in December the 20th, 2023, a dawn raid by about a dozen police. We have a situation, incidentally, in Britain where rape has been virtually decriminalised. The police don't have enough resources to investigate it. But when it comes to so-called anti-terrorism, the police have unlimited resources. There's absolutely no problem in squads of them touring the country, seeking out to arrest Palestine solidarity activists. But that's the nature, if you like, of the justice system. So I was on bail, first police bail and then court bail. And my trial will be in January at Kingston Crown Court, one of the 3 courts in the south which can try terrorism offences. And it's absolutely clear that the anti-terrorism laws are being used to suppress free speech on Palestine. What they have nothing to do with is actually combating terrorism itself. I mean, we all know what terrorism is. When you plan to bomb at a concert hall in Manchester, the Manchester Arena, or you have the Bataclan massacre by ISIS in Paris. I mean, the anti-terrorism laws really have nothing to say about these. They are there to suppress dissent, and they are using the very terrorism they created, because before Iraq's invasion there was no ISIS, and before Western interference in Afghanistan there was no Al-Qaeda either. So the Western powers create the very terrorism that they then use as the excuse to clamp down on democratic rights. So I will be in court in January. I was also arrested last October after having given a speech at the picket outside Zippy Hotovely's residence. And I was arrested for saying that Israel today, I was simply quoting a Jewish Chronicle article on a speech that I made, or a comment I made at Palestine Expo, that Israel was Hitler's bastard offspring. But can we really suggest that that is anything is outrageous? Hitler pursued, both in the invasion of Russia and also in the siege of the Jewish ghettos in Poland, a policy of death by hunger, the hunger plan. And that is exactly what Israel is doing today with Gaza, literally starving a civilian population in order apparently to defeat Hamas, though that itself is open to question. But it's not all doom and gloom. And I think the proscription of Palestine Action has also shown the weakness, because, as Huda said, they've been taken aback by the protests, and they haven't died down. On the contrary, they've increased, and hopefully people will go up to London on the 6th of September, and we will, in our thousands, hold up banners saying we support Palestine Action, and thus render the law incapable of being enforced. I think that is really important. And I have to say, to Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which I helped co-found, and which distanced itself from any action in support of Palestine Action, that if they're not to be totally useless and futile and irrelevant to the struggle for Palestine in this country, that they should get behind those protests. And the same for Stop the War Coalition. There is no point holding massive national demonstrations through empty streets, which are totally ignored by the media, when there is a very real and living campaign against the attempts of the British state to clamp down on organisations like Palestine Action, because they pose a threat to British foreign policy in the Middle East. I mean, that's really what it's about. So I am hoping, if anyone here is in Palestine Solidarity, and if Ben Jamal is listening, that they will indeed reverse their position and not abstain from what is a living struggle. And on the prescription of Palestine Action, I can't help but comment on Yvette Cooper, a despicable and pathetic woman that she is. On the very day that the prescription of Palestine Action was laid before Parliament, she was dressed in the colours of the Suffragettes, and she appeared along with other women on the Labour benches, proudly supporting the Suffragettes. Anyone who knows anything of the history of the Suffragettes knows that compared the Palestine Action, compared to the Suffragettes, are really just kindergarten children. The Suffragettes bombed and burned their way for 2 or 3 whole years, from 1912 to 1914, bombing Lloyd George's house, throwing a hatchet at him, narrowly missing him and catching an Irish nationalist MP on the ear. They poured corrosive liquids in post office boxes. They attacked railways. I mean, compared to Palestine Action, they were a terrorist group in many ways. Yet today, the hypocrites on Labour's benches, not least our Home Secretary, are proud to stand with them. That just, I think, really tells you something about the nature of the people who oppose us. And I just want to say also about the proscription of Hamas, because Hamas was first proscribed, I think it was 2001, and then Priti Patel, one of the most corrupt and dishonest politicians we have, and there's a very fierce competition for that, was proscribed in November 21 by Priti Patel. That is the political wing was prescribed. And what that really means is that anyone who is a member of Hamas's political wing, be they a doctor, a teacher, a civilian worker, anyone who works in a job who has anything to do with the government and administration in Gaza, is called a terrorist. A nurse, a health worker, they are all terrorists on a par with those who are fighting in the tunnels. And what that is, it means that Israel has in its eyes and in the eyes of the West a legitimate excuse to bomb and attack hospitals, schools, and any other civilian structure. In other words, the proscription of Hamas's political wing is a warrant for genocide, nothing less. It cannot be anything other. And I think in particular emphasis should be put on that. I think the proscription of Hamas's military wing is outrageous, of course, because it's a resistance movement, not a terrorist movement. But to prescribe the political wing of it, just imagine, for instance, that Sinn Féin had been proscribed in the 70s. Then the British Army would have had an excuse to presumably bomb the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast because some Sinn Féin member was having medical treatment. I mean, it is totally and utterly outrageous.
Could you conclude, Tony?
Yes,
please.
Yes, I will conclude because I'm sure I've gone over time. I just want to say one final thing in response to Frank about whether Zionism is fascist. I don't think Zionism in its origins and its, if you like, its political nature has been fascist over the ages. But what has happened is a revisionist strain, which was a fascist strain or strand within Zionism, has come to power. And we now see people who are open neo-Nazis really in the Israeli government. I mean, compared to Ben Gvir, Marine Le Pen is a socialist. I mean, it is quite absurd. These are really genocidal fascists, and we should treat them as such. So thank you very much. And I'm sorry if I've gone on a bit long.
Thank you very much, Tony. You have, but it was all well worth listening to, which is the most important thing. All of you, thank you. Before we start the Q&A,